from blah to brilliant. Today, we're sharing our best quick fixes to instantly improve your church's announcements.
And these are easy tweaks. No need to overhaul everything you're already doing.
We've got 5 easy upgrades that work, proven, and tested in real churches.
Let's dive in.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tools Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shear, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him the McLaren Minister. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
We, of course, over many episodes have talked about our church announcements formula. And let's be clear off the top. 90% of announcements effectiveness is going to come down to your ability to deploy this formula successfully. To recap, that formula is simple. One story plus one next step. That is what works. We're not going to spend this episode recapping and re-going through our church announcements formula because if you've listened for a little while, you're familiar with it. What we're going to instead talk about are additional adjustments that you can make on top of this. Little minor tweaks, minor upgrades that can make all the difference so long as you're already doing what's right. And my goal with an episode like this is not for you to hear, the 5 different adjustments that we're going to go through and have you implement all of them. But as we're going to spend the next 30 minutes together, just take one of these that you feel like resonates with you and put it into action. What might come from that? One person more taking a next step, or 15 more people taking a next step, whatever it might be. And if everyone listening to this episode does that, what will happen is thousands of people will get involved in a church event that previously would not have. And I think that's exciting.
Well, what's nice about these is if you're already employing the church announcements formula, which is one story plus one next step, that precedes all of this. If you are, you can use and employ any of these 5 kind of swerves, remixes at any time. So one of them surely is going to stick out to you, be like, oh yeah, I can use that this week, but double back on this episode later on, take some notes, and you can revisit any of these 5 throughout the year to kind of, because the announcements time during church, it can be predictable. And even if you're doing one story and one next step, if people know when it's coming up, maybe they just tune out. And so sometimes you gotta put a little swerve on them and spice things up a little bit. These 5 tips today will surely help you accomplish that. Last
year, we went on a church filming trip to Australia. And on the way home from Australia, it's far away from Canada. We
about as far as you can get.
Some are saying. We had a stopover in the country of Qatar. So we had like a 20-hour stopover there. And, pro tip, if you're flying back from that side of the world, I know it makes sense to, on a short distance, go from Australia like direct to like LAX or direct to Vancouver, wherever it might be. We went the long way and we stopped halfway through. We found it made jet lag a lot more manageable.
Nice.
Did not come home jet lagged at all because we kind of stopped halfway. Anyway, we had this 20-hour layover in Qatar. And I'm looking through like, what are we going to do when we're in Qatar? And we had all these things planned. And then I came across, the F1 race weekend. The Grand Prix is being held while we're there. So I reach out to one of our employees who's a big F1 I'm like, okay, like we're there and it's happening. Like, should we go?
Should we go?
I don't know anything. And he's like, if you don't go, we will have a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like, what do I need to do? Like, he's like, okay, just watch like a season of Drive to Survive. And I knew this documentary series existed, but I had no, I just didn't grow up watching racing or anything, so didn't care for it. Anyway, since going to that Grand Prix in Qatar, just by happenstance, I have become greatly involved and invested in F1.
And that's an understatement.
We set up a fantasy league for the company. Now, we already have a fantasy football league called Throw Church Tools.
Yeah.
We now have an F1 fantasy league called Pro Church Fuels.
Nice.
Everyone's involved in it. And so, as we go through these, I'm just going to give, as is appropriate, a little metaphor to F1 to kind of really hammer home the point.
Okay, let's see what you got. You want to go with the first one?
Let's go with the first one.
This first one's called the curveball.
The curveball. Okay, here's the thing in racing.
That didn't take long.
So every race...
It's literally a baseball term.
So you thought. Well, apparently I could only do sports metaphors. So in racing, every race, there are 3 different tires that you can use.
Right.
There's going to be a soft tire, a medium tire, and a hard tire. A soft tire allows you to go faster, but will degrade quicker.
Yeah.
A hard tire, you can run longer, but it won't let you go as fast. And so there are these strategic decisions that you have to make. And in the most recent race I watched, everyone had decided to start on a soft tire.
Yeah.
Except at the top of the grid, one guy One team had done it differently. That's what we call a curveball. And you can do the same in church. So there are so many different ways that you can employ this. Do you normally do 5 announcements? Do one long extended announcement instead. Do you normally do announcements between worship and the sermon? Perhaps do it to kick off service, or do it like after the fast songs, before the slow songs. Maybe have a different person do announcements. We employ this in our church in a variety of ways, not exclusive to announcements. Okay. We call it the creative curveball. And the idea is that one of the great things about church is that it is very rhythmic. It is liturgy. It is tradition, where every Sunday we show up, we gather, and we worship Jesus. We hear the word of the scriptures. The downside of this is that it can become predictable. Yeah. And so we as humans by nature, when we see something and we're like, I know when this happens, we can just kind of like fall into this like trance like moment. We experience this when we drive home from work. Okay, you drive home the exact same way every single time. Sometimes you'll get home and be like,
who drove me here?
I don't really remember. That is
was that safe?
The exact same effect. So we want to basically do something different, a creative curveball, to re-engage audience attention, to re-engage the congregation, because suddenly they're expecting one cue, they see something different. Oh, now I'm paying more attention.
Yeah, I mean, psychologically, it's just a pattern interrupt, right? Like we are pattern-oriented creatures, beings, and our brains really thrive in a patterned environment. And so when we are used to an order of service, a liturgy, when that pattern gets interrupted, boom, we snap out of whatever flow state we're in and snap into, I need to pay attention to what's going on here because I expected one thing and something else is happening. So of course, you don't want to be doing this every week to keep people on their toes because that would just result in seasickness. But yeah, the pattern interrupt can be really effective for, garnering some attention or just keeping things a little lively.
Yeah. And I think even just doing one long extended announcement is an easy way to make this switch. When you have something really important coming up, like we're entering into the season of VBS, like perhaps you do an extended announcement all about that rather than like 5 little announcements. Yeah. If you're always doing 3 to 9 announcements in a week, mix it up and just do a week where there's like one extended one.
I love the idea of incorporating other people too, because there's like a communal aspect to that too, right? It's like, okay, it's not just the same person with the mic every week. It's like, no, we're hearing from different voices. We're giving other people the opportunity to have their voice amplified on the microphone. I think that's there's like a communal aspect to that as well.
Rotating cast of hosts, they're going to have different cadences. Yeah. They're going to have different perspectives. They're going to have different like intonation in their voices. Like all of these things play a role in keeping people's attention and not allowing them to tune out in the announcements. Because that's what's going to happen, right? Like, okay, we're here for an hour or two. Where can I like just take a look? Where can I let my brain just turn off my brain a little bit? Oh, announcements time? That's what's going to naturally happen. So.
Yeah. Okay, that was number 1, the curveball. Number 2, the callback.
The idea of the callback is to deliver the same announcement twice during an individual service.
Okay.
So let's imagine Pastor Alex is preaching and Brady is the announcements host. So I'm doing hosting and I'm doing it after worship before the message. And I'm talking about VBS, okay? We'll probably use that as an example throughout because at the time of this recording, that's kind of the big thing on the forecast for churches coming up in the next season. So I'm doing my announcement. I'm doing the typical one story plus one next step. I talk about VBS. One of the things that happened last year, it was crazy. The students stole all the water guns, and then it became this water gun with the kids versus the advisors, instructors, and it was just a great old time. Anyway, no firearms at this year's event, but if you want to get involved, go to this place. Yeah. And then Alex and I would have talked and be like, hey, like, and this wouldn't come from me. It would probably come from Alex, like the senior leader or the senior leadership, where he'd say, hey, it's really important this year that we get VBS promoted. Like we had a bunch of kids come from the community last year that carried over to Sunday, and we still have families coming. We have a few families that came first through VBS and are still here today. So I really want to hammer that home, okay? I'm the communications guy. I'm like, how about we go with the callback? That's the play that we're going to run here. So I'm going to talk about it, but I want you as well, Pastor, to weave it in naturally into your sermon. And the key to making this work is it can't feel like it's being pigeonholed in there. It has to come up. And I would say my Pastor Bill at Central, does this exceptionally well. And I'm not confident that it's something that we're not talking to him and like planning it this way. if your pastor doesn't do this naturally, you kind of have to plan it, and then it can come more naturally. But what'll happen is like a host will deliver announcements, and then he'll like bring up one of them naturally in the sermon in real time.
Yeah.
And what this does is it allows you to hear the same thing twice, which just means that it's going to be more sticky that way. And it also then has like the senior leader's stamp of approval on it. Hey, if I'm putting this inside the message and it's coming from my mouth, one, it's important. And two, it's so important that within the message, I'm promoting this next step.
Yeah.
The callback. Your thoughts?
Well, as a pastor who's primarily responsible for the sermonizing, I find that this comes most naturally to me when the event, the thing that we're talking about, is synonymous with the mission and vision of our church. When those things that we're promoting are motivated by our shared values, it's almost effortless to hit it in the sermon, because the topic of the sermon is the thing that everything we're doing as a church flows from, right? It's the story of Jesus Christ. So when our events are inspired by that value system, like, however you define your values as a church, whatever language you use for your mission and vision, when those events are kind of downstream of that, it almost feels effortless to bring them up, because it's like, yeah, we're talking about Jesus, but the reason we're doing VBS is because of this thing that we're reading in the gospel text today. We do the callback in this way in our order of service. Every time we gather to worship, we start by reading a psalm, but the psalm is always related to the gospel reading that we will sermonize later on in the worship service. So there's always continuity there. And so yes, the callback as it relates to announcements serves to kind of give that senior voice stamp of approval for sure. And it also just kind of, coalesces the entirety of what you're talking about and what you're doing as a church into one big thing. It takes it out of like being partitioned. VBS is over here and the sermon is over here and the soup kitchen is over here. It's like, no, this all belongs. This is all actually one act of worship inspired by our values. So it really is like, there's kind of like this cosmic intermingling when you weave these things together that kind of unites your church of like, oh, this is why we do what we do. I see it kind of traced throughout the entire order of worship. So calling it back in the sermon really is really useful in that way.
It's more compelling for someone to get involved as well, because when it is traced directly to the mission of the church, then it's like, oh yeah, this is how we are meant to behave. This is who we are and where we're going. Okay. Where I love that word partition. That's kind of how announcements are typically structured, where it's like this one and now full stop, this one, now full stop, this one, full stop. And they're completely in their own silos. And it's not as compelling to get involved, because it's like, oh yeah, you're just kind of like going through the order and you're just hitting all the main points. And now we're going to get to the real thing.
Yes.
When we get to the quote unquote real thing, and it is intersecting with the announcements and the opportunities that exist beyond Sunday service, you're right. Now we have a more cohesive communication being provided to the people, and they're more likely to respond.
Yeah. Okay, next one, favorite of ours, the interview.
Yeah, so I did this for, I don't think it was VBS, but it was kids ministry related during a hosting segment. So we wanted to do one story plus one next step. And my version of the story was not going to be me talking about this is what happened last year, or, hey, I had a formative moment at something like this when I was a kid in a similar type of church event. So we wanted more kids ministry volunteers. So we're going to translate this to our VBS example and say, we want more volunteers for VBS this year. So we bring up a couple of the volunteers from the previous year. And all we're doing is like Q&A on the stage. So one, this has a nice swerve element because it's not typically something that you see.
Yes.
It also swerves not just because there's multiple people on stage, different voices, different story format, but it's a completely different cadence of communication because now it's not me monologuing, it's dialogue.
Yes.
It's why we prefer to do this podcast as two people instead of me just like reading through like my thoughts, because it's more personable and you get to like experience the back and forth. And often what happens is we might have a planned thing and then we'll hit on something in the moment that spurs something organic. And that's like even more impactful for folks than what we had planned to say. And so this is an easy one. All of these are meant to be easy. If you're listening to this on a Friday on a Wednesday, I know I have to hit on this type of announcement on Sunday. I could use this. That's the idea here. We don't want you to overhaul anything. The interview, it can just be you plus one person, you plus two people. And to make it easy, you can even start with like someone that's serving that morning.
Yeah.
So you don't have to coordinate like, we want to get like Jim and Jen up there. Like, but they're just attending. Okay, they need to like, come backstage or they need to be like near the front so we can call them up, whatever it might be. Make it easy.
How much coordination do you think deserves to happen before doing an interview like this to make it successful? So it doesn't feel just kind of like you're going off the top of your head when you're trying to effectively communicate a story that leads to a next step.
Yeah, it can be a delicate balance because on the one hand, you want to be prepared so that it is not clear that this is failing on stage.
Yes.
You also don't want it to be so overly prepared that it feels scripted and it lacks that authenticity. You do want it to feel genuine. So it depends on how well you know the people.
Sure.
You can definitely lean into relational equity that you have. And so if it's someone that you know pretty well, you can go pretty off the cuff. You just need to know the main story beats that you want to hit and how you, the host, are going to then tie it into the next step. Because it can very quickly get derailed if you don't have a firm grasp on, okay, at this point, I'm going to turn this to the people away from this person to them. Because you're hearing their experience, you then need to turn that into a call to action for others to experience the same thing. So we might have a quick conversation, okay, me and Alex. Alex is the one I'm interviewing. I'm like, okay, like, what do you remember from VBS last year? And he's just like kind of hitting some things. And then I'll like notice something that I think I can turn into like the pivot point. Yeah. And then I'll make sure that we get to that last and then that becomes the pivot point. And I'll probably give you like a brief, heads up. Like, okay, we're having this conversation because we want more people to get involved. We want to hear about your positive experience. When we were talking, you mentioned this. I'll probably ask something similar. When you hit on that, that's when I'll probably pivot.
Easy.
And the next step is also important. Always keep it brief. It's going to be real awkward if you're up there giving this long spiel for a next step and then they're just standing there.
Yeah.
Our next step is always the same, right? Every single announcement has the same destination. So go to, lifeabundant.com or the Life Abundant kiosk in the lobby, whatever it might be. That's the same call to action. It's one sentence. So it's not awkward when I go, and if you want to have a similar experience to Alex, we need more VBS volunteers this year. Go to lifeabundant.com or the Life Abundant kiosk in the lobby. And hey, let's give Alex a big hand, right? And then he walks off stage and then I keep going. If that next step spiel becomes too long, Alex is there, hands, clasped together.
And not knowing where to put them.
Yeah, what do I do with my hands? So we want to avoid that.
All right, Easter's in the rear view. We're headed towards VBS. We know VBS is coming. It's the type of event, for some churches, it's a cornerstone event, type of event you need to talk about for multiple weeks at a time. We call this one the interaction.
Yeah, okay. This one's a bit more involved, and so I don't think it necessarily needs to be done if you've got a one-off announcement. The challenge when you need to announce something, the same thing, multiple weeks in a row, is you start to go like, freaking Brady, one story plus one next step. How many stories am I supposed to have with the same thing?
I just want people to sign up.
So the interactive element, the interaction idea, is to, of course, get the audience involved. So there are really an unending number of different ways that you can do this. Depending on the size of your congregation, you can make it really simple where you're like asking a question and like you just have one person answer it.
Sure.
You can do it text-based, like where there's like an actual poll. That's a fun one where you have people voting and then you can return to the results the week after.
Yeah, that's good.
You can do something where there's an incentive. So if it's like VBS, and the cost for the camp is like, it's $50 for the week. It's, whatever, subsidized by the church, but it's $50 per camper. You could have like, hey, like we've got like, one 50% off one to give for the first person that can answer like this question. And it's a fun like trivia thing and it's simple. Yeah. And then you announce the winners next week. Like anything that it doesn't do the one story plus one next step thing. You're replacing the story with like live audience interaction. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like a person actually saying something. If your church is small enough, that might be the perfect fit.
Yeah.
If you want to do it where it's completely like done through text and you think that more people will get involved that way or whatever, that works as well. And then there's also value. This is like a multi-week callback in a sense, where you do it in 1 week and then you carry it over next week. And you could make an entire announcements campaign around this. So if you know you have to promote something for 4 weeks, you could start this in week 1, do it again in week 2, do it again in week 3 with the final call to action in week 4. This will draw more attention to the event that clearly is very important to the church if you're going to announce it multiple weeks in a row, because it's novel. It's different. It's set apart from all the other announcements that are done in the typical fashion.
Yeah.
This one is different. So people are going to see, okay, this is being highlighted in a different way. My attention is being paid to it in a different way. And again, what does that translate to? The thing that we care about, why we do all of this, so that people get involved in church. We want ministries full of active participants and not passive spectators.
Do you think there's a way to marry digital ministry with in-person ministry as it relates to the interaction style of announcement? Do you think there's a way to use your social media voice during the week to inspire some sort of interactive, like I thought of it when you were mentioning the, let's say a free ride to summer camp this year, VBS. Like, is there a way to use social media to inspire some interaction and then to surface that interaction, whether it be a poll or a trivia thing on Sunday morning? Do you think there's a way to bridge those two types of ministry to achieve more awareness and essentially more next steps for an event like this?
Yeah, 100%. So you could basically say, hey, on Thursday at noon, we're going to be dropping, whatever it might be on our Instagram story. The first person to claim that will, and so then people are like watching for that, and you have to be following, you have to be like, so now you're moving the audience and you're like connecting with them both in person and online.
Yeah.
And then you could then announce it and say, and the person that did it on stage the next week was Angela. Congrats to Angela and her family. We're doing it again Thursday at noon. And it becomes, over this like multi-week thing, this recurring thing. And then that also pays dividends in the sense that once you're through that announcement period, because people have been taking action on your social accounts and like clicking to your profile, those positive signals are being logged by the algorithm. And then your posts are being more likely to be served in front of those people for a few weeks to come. And if you're doing social well, now those people are engaging. Now you're building a positive snowball there. I think that's great. I think for youth ministry, you could do this, where it could be like scavenger hunt related. I know that like sports teams do this. Like, we've hidden a pair of tickets in, some random suburb, and the first person to find it can go to the game tonight. So like you could have like, we have, hidden a golden ticket for the retreat. The person that finds that on Friday night at youth, Friday at 5 p.m. we'll be dropping the hint. And at that point, the scavenger hunt is open. And so then, you've got like an hour before youth and people are like, there, and they're like, looking for stuff. And so that could be a fun way of doing it with more of a youth-centric focus.
Yeah, I love that. All right, fifth and final tip, another football term, but we haven't had any racing analogies in the last few tips here. So really eager to see where you go with this one. The Audible.
Yeah, it really just shows that I'm still learning this sport because this is also a tire-related strategy. So in the last race that I watched, there are different tire strategies. One of the rules in F1 racing, which is what we're talking about, is that you have to use two different tire compounds. So if you feel like, for the weather and the heat and our race car, the medium tires are best. You can't only use mediums.
Right.
At one point, you have to change from medium to soft or from medium to hard. And that's to create more equity in the sport, but also to introduce more variance and provide for opportunities where like you have a plan, but then, things are not going to plan. We have to adjust on the fly. We have to call an audible. Any excuse to talk about F1, I'm just like trying to, clearly I'm pigeonholing that into here. So this one is the most niche and most specific, and thus should be deployed most sparingly. The idea with the audible is it's almost like the trope that you see in movies where like the best man has a speech to deliver and he's like, I had this all written out.
Yes.
But I'm just going to speak from the heart.
Yeah.
And so like you're basically purposefully preparing yourself to deliver something to then like deliver something else. Be like, you don't want to pretend and lie. Don't be like, I had this all written out and I've decided in the moment to not. Be like, you know what? This is how I do this announcement. I have all the information here about the cost of VBS, the days, and the location, and what we're doing. Look, I know you all can find that on your own. We got to talk about something else instead. Last year, and then you jump into your story. That simple setup is going to draw every single person's attention, because how it gets interpreted is, there was a plan and there's a departure from the plan. We're watching something spontaneous in real time. This is not structured or prepared. and thus it deserves my attention more. Okay, the human brain is dumb, apparently.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
I think another thing that you could do if you're really, now you'd have to lean into the camp of this so that it's obvious, because I really don't want this to seem like inauthentic, like you're lying.
Totally.
Churches have done this forever. I remember this from kids ministry when I was a kid. Like someone is giving an announcement and then like someone else comes on stage like, psst, actually, we have something else we have to introduce. And it's clearly like staged and cheesy, but it's done because like you can't help but pay attention to it. So use this sparingly, but I do think it can be very, very effective. If you're gonna do it where it's like obvious, make sure it's obvious so that people are picking up like, this is like a prepared like little skit thing, that's fine. And then if you're doing it where you know you're gonna do it, but you want it to come off as like in the moment, just don't make any claims that are untrue. Just say, look, I could give you all this information, but I'm not. I'm going to do this instead. I'm confident you can find that information yourself. That's all true.
Yeah.
But it gets like perceived as like, oh, okay, there's something happening. I need to pay more attention.
I ran an Audible a couple weeks ago and actually called it an Audible. The gospel text that week was about the anointing at Bethany. So Mary anointing Jesus' feet with the alabaster jar of fragrance. And I've been thinking about that. And honestly, sometimes at churches get tired of hearing my own voice. And so I got up there to read the gospel and I'm like, I said this out loud to the church. I said, can I call an audible right now? And I defined the term because I said audible sometime recently and someone didn't know what it was. An audible is basically like in football, you've got a play ready to run. The defense does something unexpected. So you, at the very last moment as a quarterback, you say, let's do something completely different. That's an audible.
Oh, so they probably thought we're like, oh, you're just going to play an audiobook?
Yeah, exactly. So I said, can I call an audible? I said, is there a woman in this room that will like volunteer to come read the gospel text? And it was not staged, it was not scripted. It was just like, I want a woman to read this and I don't want to read it. And so someone put their hand up. So we exchanged the mic. I went and sat down in my chair. She got up and read it. She read it for the first time. So there was something about that moment that, yes, to the pattern interrupt thing. It's like, yeah, okay, that got everyone's like attention, but it also had meaning that was a little bit deeper than just trying to gain attention that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise had. So you're so right about that, about when choosing to run an audible. Yes, it has to be done sparingly because back to the football thing, it's like, well, if you're running an audible all the time, is it really an audible? And then secondly, it has to be authentic. It has to be true. And if it's not, it must come across as, basically scripted or playful.
Yeah. And how do audibles work in football? You read the defense, you react to the defense. So you were just describing that. You are reading the congregation, feeling the moment, discerning the moment, and then making an adjustment on the fly. And, for better or for worse, pastors are like the masters at this. Like, they'll be like, you know what? I had a 72-page manuscript written. I burned it 4 minutes ago because the Spirit just dropped on me some real knowledge. And I'm like, that was I don't.
Yeah, the announcements person can't really get away with that.
I got some questions. Like, okay, let's hope it's true. And then you go with it. So, I think another way of deploying this would be to be aware of its potency and just wait until the moment presents itself. So don't plan it at all.
Right.
Just know, okay, this is a profound way of communicating. And so long as I do it when it is genuine and I feel it in the moment, there is nothing wrong with that. Right? Like if you're a worship leader, sometimes you will plan to like, we're going to finish, we're going to like settle, and then we're going to do the bridge all over again. Sometimes you don't plan it and you still are like, ooh, let's do the bridge all over again. And so I think both are valuable. And depending on who you are as a person, you might feel more comfortable with one or the other. Perhaps you're like, I like to prepare everything. And I think that shows like excellence and my study and preparation, and it translates to effectiveness. Perhaps you're the person that's like, the Spirit will let me know milliseconds before it happens. And to me, that translates to the most genuine, and it shows that I am willing to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit in the moment, and that translates to effectiveness. So I think you can use the exact same technique, and whatever motivates you in the moment, that's up to you. 5 different things here: the curveball, the callback, the interview, the interaction, the audible. One way that I also think would be useful to put these into practice is to commit for the next 5 weeks to do one each week. Do them in order or out of order if that feels more comfortable. Practice these things. We talk about in social: repeat the best, forget the rest, continue to test. Consider these 5 things the continue to test stanza of communication. It makes sense for social, it makes sense for in-person. And force yourself to do one each week. And then see how it goes. And like take inventory after the fact. this is how people responded. This is how I could have done it differently. This is what I liked about how I did it. This is how it felt. And instead of just like taking only one, which I think is an equally valid approach, I just want people to try them. You could commit to trying all 5 over the next 5 weeks. And what would happen is you'd probably learn a lot about yourself and about how your church responds to your style of communication, how you intersect with these specific techniques. If we keep doing things the same way, week in, week out, they will become stale. And when things become stale for you, they definitely become stale for the church. And that is an indictment on us because it's not our job to go through the order of what we're responsible for and say, I talked about it, I talked about it, I talked about it, I talked about it. Our responsibility is getting people involved in the things, not simply communicating them. And so continuing to hone your own craft and do things that are uncomfortable and introduce new ways of presentation, that is also our responsibility. Our responsibility as a podcast is to give you ideas. My hope is that you put them into action. Irrespective of that, though, thank you for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you next week. Forza Ferrari. Racing makes me happy.
Hey, I'm thinking about ditching Mercedes. He's like, I don't want to be. I want to be Lando.
Nonetheless. Here we go.